Hello, friends. Oh, it's so good to see you again. Seamus here, and I have no idea how I'll post another story in a few weeks turned into 5 months, but nevertheless, here I am. And I hope to have another one up before Yuletide, but we'll see how it goes. I have a lovely story to share with you today, and before I get started, I want to give an especially big hello, shout out, word of appreciation to my friends Miss Joanne and Miss Jillian, who have been incredibly supportive and kind to me over the last little while. And I just really want them to know that I appreciate it. I don't know if this story is a folk story or a fairy tale or a bit of legend or lore. Well, and to me, I kind of live my life like it's a fairy tale. So let's just go with that. This is called the King's Riddle. And it's a story about an old father that never had anything and a young king that was rich in land and not much else, and the clever woman that helps them both. So let's begin, shall we? Once upon a time, many, many hundreds, you know what? So many hundreds, forget about how many hundreds of years ago. A long, long time ago, there was a young king who had a kingdom in which he was rich in land, but not a lot of people. And in his land, there was an old father, a widower whose wife had passed some time before, raising his older daughter, and he had no dowry for her. And that dowry was because he had never had a bit of land of his own. And one morning he was sitting at the breakfast table in their simple wood-planked hut, meager fire in the corner and even more meager rations in the bowl. And he was moaning and groaning about his status in life. And his daughter said, "Father, what is it that troubles you so today?" And he says, "Oh, my dear, you know, it's time for you to be looking to start a life of your own and maybe find a fine fella or something like that. And I've no dowry to give you." He says, "I've no dowry because I've never had my own land. And I've always had to work for other people or tradesmen or farmers. And I've nothing to give to you. I've no legacy to leave you." And she said, "Well, Father, if land is what you're worried about, never having your own bit of land, the king has more land than he needs. Why don't you just go and ask the king for a bit of land?" And the father says, "You're telling me that I should just go ahead and ask the king for a bit of land?" And she said, "Well, Father, dear, you have nothing now. If you ask the king and he says no, nothing changes. But if you ask the king and he said yes, everything could change." And he said, "Sure, it's a clever lass you are. You always have been. We'll do that very thing." And on the morrow, they rose up extra early. They had their simple breakfast. They went out of their little shack, down the road and through the neighboring town and off to the far side of the town, down into the valley where the king had his castle. And they got to the gate and they spoke to the guard. And the guard said, "Well, today's the day for bringing petitions to the king." And he turned them over to the clerk, and the clerk took them into the chamber. And at the appropriate time, they were called forward to meet the king. And the king, a nice benevolent young man, said, "So, old timer, what is it that I could do for you today?" And he moaned and groaned and said how he never had anything because he didn't have his own land and his daughter and he's a widower and oh, woe is me. And the king said, "So what you're asking for is for me to just give you some land?" "Yes, your majesty, I know it's horrible, horrible." And no, be patient now. This is what I'll do. I love riddles. So I will pose you a riddle, old man. And if you can answer the riddle, you'll have a fine bit of land for yourself and your daughter. And the old man said, "Oh, your majesty, I hate riddles. I'm no good at them." And the daughter says, "Well, perhaps, your majesty, I could help." And the king says, "Well, of course, you're both welcome to take a try. Here's the riddle. What's higher than high and lower than low, hotter than hot and colder than cold, finer than kindness and worse than evil? It's what the devil eats, and if we eat it, we would die." And the father said, "Oh, your majesty, I said I'm no good at this thing. I don't know what to do." But the daughter said, Father, it's all right. Your majesty, I have your answer." He says, "Do you now? Go ahead." And the daughter said, "What's higher than high and lower than low, hotter than hot, colder than cold, finer than kindness and worse than evil? It's what the devil eats, and if we eat it, we would die." Well, that would be nothing. And the king says, "Sure, you're very right. What a clever young girl you have here, sir. I'll give you a bit of land. Go with my clerk. He'll sign it over. In fact, the place where your wee hut is now, that is now your land to use as you see fit." He sent them on their way. Well, they made their way home, and just a few days later, the first warm winds of spring came through, and it was time to start with the farming. And the old man went out with his shovel, and he put the shovel in the ground. And on the very first push of the spade, he felt a thud and heard a clink, and he stopped in a panic. And he threw the shovel down and dug in the dirt, and up out of the earth, not more than 6 inches down, he found a lovely golden cup. And he ran into the house. He was wiping it off, and he said, daughter dear, look what I found." And she saw the golden cup, and her eyes flared open, and she said, "Father, that'll take care of us for years." He says, "Oh, no, none of that. I'm going to take this cup right to the king and give it to him as a thank you for granting us this land." And the daughter said, "Oh, Father, I don't think that's a fine idea at all." "Oh, and why wouldn't it be fine?" She says, "If you take this cup to the king, he's going to ask you where the saucer is." "Well, daughter, there was no saucer." And she said, "I know that, and you know that, but the king, he's not going to believe you." And the father said, "Oh, no, no, don't be daft. All is well, all is well." And the next morning, off he went to the king's castle, and he told the guard that he had a gift, and the guard told the clerk, and the clerk took him into the king, and the king called him forward. He says, "Oh, very good, old man. Didn't I just give you some land a few days ago?" He says, "Oh, yes, your majesty, and I came with a gift of thanks to you because my first day on the farm, I put the shovel in and I turned the soil, and I found this lovely golden cup, and I give it to you to say thank you." And the king said, "Oh, this is a lovely cup. Where's the saucer?" And the old man said, "Oh, no, 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 your majesty, there was no saucer, just the cup." And the king said, "Sure, but I've never seen a cup without a saucer. Where's the saucer?" And they went back and forth, and finally the king said, "Fine, fine, I've got a solution for you." And he called one of the guards and he says, "Take this old man down to the cells and see if you can't convince him to tell his king the truth." And off he went. Well, about an hour or so later, the guard came back and he said, "Your majesty, it's no use." "What do you mean it's no use?" And he says, "Every time I press the man for the truth about the saucer, he says, 'Oh, I should have listened to my daughter. Oh, I should have listened to my daughter. She's so clever.'" So they called the old man up. And he asked the old man, "Whatever is it do you mean?" And he says, "My daughter said that if I brought you the cup, you'd ask for the saucer and you'd never believe me." The king thought for a moment. He says, "All right, then. I'll do this for you if you're telling me the truth. You go home and you speak this riddle to your daughter. And if she can come back in 3 days' time and answer the riddle correctly, you'll keep the cup, you'll keep your land, and all will be well. You'll have your freedom forever." And he spoke the riddle and sent the old man home. Well, the old man gets back to his daughter and he tells her the whole story about how the king threw him in jail and the guards were mean and now he had a riddle and he didn't know what to do. And "Father, Father, just tell me the riddle." And he says to his daughter, "Here's the riddle. You have to appear before the king in 3 days' time. You have to come not by night nor by day. You have to come not walking nor riding. You have to come to him not clothed but not yet naked. And you have to come to him with a gift but without a gift. And I don't know what we're going to do." And she said, "Father dear, have no fear, all is well. But go into town and buy me these 3 things." And she sends him to buy a goat, a dove, and a fishing net. And he just surrenders to her wisdom and he goes and does what she asked. And very, very, very early on the morning of the 3rd day, she rises up, she has her breakfast, she changes out of her gown and wraps herself, but nothing in the fishing net. So she's not naked, but she's still modest. And she leads the goat out and she has the dove in a little canvas bag and she walks away from the house and through the town. And as she gets to the far side of the town and is heading for the valley, she puts one leg up over the goat and lets the goat drag her to the gate. And she tells the guard to call the king because she's there with the answer to his riddle. And the guard calls the clerk and the clerk calls the king and the king comes to the gate. And just as they open the gate, the very first faintest hint of dawn, not even dawn, that false light just before is breaking over the land. And the king looks and sees the first rays of light, but he can still see it's dark. And he smiles, "Ah, you've come not by night nor by day. Very good." And he takes a good look at her and he sees that she's one leg over the goat and she can see the track of her foot in the dirt. And he says, "Oh, and you've come to me not walking and not riding. That's very, very good." And he takes a look at her in the glowing light and he can see that she's wrapped in nothing but a fishing net, which certainly isn't a piece of clothing. And yet she's not naked either. And he says, "Okay, you've come to me not naked, but not clothed. Very, very good. But still in all, you were supposed to bring me a gift, but not a gift. And I see nothing." And she said, "Your majesty, please." And she reaches into the canvas bag and she comes up with the dove in her hands and he can see the dove's head and its feet. And she says, "This is for you." And as she reaches out her hands and he reaches to take it, she opens her hands and the dove flies away. So sure, she's brought him a gift, but there is no gift. And the king laughs and says, "You are as wise as you are lovely. In fact, you're so lovely. Would you like to marry me?" And the daughter agrees. Well, over the next little while, all the arrangements are made and the ceremony is done. And of course, her father moves into the castle and all is well. And at the wedding feast, the king says to her, "The only thing I ask of you, my dear, whatever else you may do in my kingdom, just please don't embarrass me in front of my people." And she gives her word. Well, it's not more than about a month later. She's gone out for a walk one morning and she sees a cowherd sitting at a cow farmer, a cowherd. Not a coward, but a cowherd, sitting at the end of his laneway, bawling, "Oh, weeping and wailing away." And she says, "Whatever is your trouble, old friend?" And he says, "Oh, your majesty, I went to your husband's court yesterday for a hearing because my prize cow threw a beautiful calf, but the calf wandered away into a neighbor's field, and the neighbor is a horse trader. And when I went to get the calf back, there was the mare and there was the colt with the calf standing between them. And the horse trader said that his mare had miraculously thrown two colts and he wouldn't give me my calf back. And when I went and spoke to the king spoke to the horse breeder and he told him, and the king thought that was lovely. And he sent me on my way without my horse, without my calf. And I don't know what to do." And the queen said, "You do this tomorrow morning." And she whispered into his ear and went back into the castle. Well, sure enough, the next morning, just as the dawn broke, the king did what he always did. He went out onto the parapet to assess his land. And there, out in the open green in front of his castle, there was the old cowherd, sitting on a little wooden stool with a fishing pole in his hand, casting like he was fishing in the middle of the king's fine green lawn. Well, the king goes stomping down the stairs and out the gate, and he goes up to the cowherd and he says, "What do you think you're doing here?" And he says, "Well, your majesty, I'm fishing." He says, "Well, you're in the middle of my square." "Yes, your majesty, but I just like fishing." And the king says, "Well, you fool, this makes about as much sense. Well, it makes no sense at all." And the cowherd looks at the king, "Your majesty, it makes about as much sense as a colt throwing a calf." And the king knew he had made an error. And he told the old cowherd to take one of his guards and go to the horse breeder and get his calf back. But before he left, he said, "You didn't figure this out on your own. Who told you to say this?" And the cowherd said, "Well, certainly, your majesty, it was your beloved lady wife." And off he goes. Well, now the king's angry because he only asked for one promise, that she not embarrass him. And he stomps back into the castle and he confronts her and he says, "This is what happened with the cowherd, and you've embarrassed me, and he's laughing at me, and I break with you. I want nothing more to do you. Pack all that you have and leave." And she says, "I'm to leave." He says, "Aye, but for the love that I have for you, my dear, you can take with you the most precious thing in the castle as my gift, but you have to leave." And she said, "Well, your majesty, for the love that I have for you, would you allow me to cook you one more meal?" And he said, "Of course." So over the course of the day, she set out all of his favorite foods. And with every course, there was another jug of something. There was a jug of ale or a jug of wine or a big crock of meat or something else delicious. So, of course, by the time the meal was done, the king was quite drunk. And he fell asleep at the table. And when he woke up in the morning, he was on a simple wooden bed in a simple wooden hut. And when he opened his eyes, he realized that there across the room, sitting at a broken down table, was the old man and the clever daughter, his new wife. And he says, "Where am I? Why am I here? Why am I in your house? What's going on?" She says, "My love, be at peace. You told me yesterday when you broke with me that when I left the castle for the love that you had for me, I could take with me the most precious thing in the castle, and the most precious thing in my life is you. So here you are." And with that, the king paused and he began to laugh. And he laughed like he had never laughed before. And they had a simple breakfast of oats and a bit of bread. And they packed everything up. And the king happily walked with his queen and his father-in-law back to the castle. And all was well. Which proves, my friends, once again, that there are some women in this world that don't need a king to rescue them, but rather they are the ones to do the rescuing. And you'll not be surprised that the king and the old man and the clever wife all lived happily ever after. I do thank you very kindly for your patience with me over these past few months. I will do my best to post another story just before Yule. In the meantime, please take good care of yourself, take good care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Cheers. Well, that was a good story, Seamus. I like that one very much. Did you like it? Oh,